Hello again. Today is Saturday, October the 19th, 2013, and it's about 4 o'clock my time. And I have a quote for you. Revolution, Latin meaning revoluto, a turnaround. It is a fundamental change in power or organizational structures that takes place in a relatively short period of time. What have we found in the way of change in power or organizational structure in a short period of time, particularly in the last half century? Well, for one thing, the election of our first African American president, Barack H. Obama II. For another thing, Anonymous, Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party, the Arab Spring and the Arab Winter, the English Defiance League, the Revolution Movement / Ron Paul Revolution, Give Us Back Our Constitution, the League of Women Voters, just to name a few. But before that, we had the women's suffrage movement, or the National American Women's Suffrage Movement, also known as the International Alliance of Women's Movement. Down the history road we go: the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Poor People's Campaign, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the American Indian Resistance Movement, or ARM. These were and are efforts born out of a need for a fundamental change in power or organizational structures. The great thing about all these efforts and movement is that they all took place in a very short period of time, and despite their longevity of history and time, are still around and still socially relevant and or accepted to this day. The main and alternative news media and those in power resent this fact. More succinctly, they hate it. Why? What's the fear? I am reminded of the passage of Scripture in the book of Acts when Peter, James, and John and the other disciples were arrested and beaten just after the ascension of Christ, when in the 5th chapter of the book of Acts this was said of their arrest and jailing by a man named at that time named Gamaliel. And I'll read for you now. Starting in the 33rd verse. When the council members heard this, they became so angry they wanted to kill the apostles. But one of the members was the Pharisee Gamaliel, a highly respected teacher. He ordered the apostles to be taken out of the room for a little while. Then he said to the council this: Men of Israel, be careful what you do with these men. Not long ago, Theudas claimed to be someone important, and about 400 men joined him. But he was killed, and all of his followers were scattered. That was the end of that. Later, when the people of our nation were being counted, Judas from Galilee showed up. A lot of people followed him, but he was killed, and all his followers were scattered. So I advise you to stay away from these men. Leave them alone. If what they are planning is something of their own doing, it will fail. But if God is behind it, you cannot stop it anyway, unless you want to fight against God. The council members agreed with what he said, and they called the apostles back in. They had them beaten with a whip and warned them not to speak in the name of Jesus. Then they let them go. The apostles left the council and were happy, because God had considered them worthy to suffer for the sake of Jesus. Every day they spent time in the temple, and in one home after another, they never stop teaching and telling the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. End quote, close quote. If such movements, such efforts, are vociferous at best and a nuisance at worst, then it will fail. It will cease to exist, especially, now I'll read for you again. Acts 5, verse 38 and 39. This is Gamaliel still speaking. So I advise you to stay away from these men. Leave them alone. If what they are planning is something of their own doing, it will fail. But if God is behind it, you cannot stop it anyway, unless you want to fight against God. Keep that in mind. If it's of their own doing, it'll fail. If it's something that God is behind, something that God Himself has ordained, there's nothing you can do to stop it. All of the up and down and the back and forth and the tete-a-tete on the soapbox and on the alphabet soup networks and on the cable news channels and all of the vociferous talk of shutting down government, of closing off government, will matter not. And it doesn't matter. If God's involved, there's nothing you or I or anybody else in the free world can do to stop it. But if it is true, is of God, as I said, there is nothing you or I can do to stop it. Or as the then former governor of California said in his 1975 CPAC address, let them go their way. Let them go their way. You think about the efforts of Gandhi, the nonviolent resistance movement effort of Gandhi, the nonviolent resistance movement of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Vernon Johns, to name a few, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the Poor People's Campaign. Did you know that the Poor People's Campaign is still ongoing as we speak today? They're still working and doing and continuing the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his brother A.D. King. It's still in full effect today, and I'll link it. I'll send all of the necessary links. I'll post all of the necessary links. But you consider the goings on in the Middle East with the Arab Spring and the so-called Arab Winter. Unfortunately, in the United Kingdom, the anti-Muslim movement, the English Defiance League, or the EDL, I don't believe that that's of God, and I don't agree or condone what the EDL is doing to the Muslim faith. But I certainly don't agree or condone what Muslims are doing to fairly civil and fairly peaceful English people by chopping them up on the streets because somebody stepped on a flag or spit on a book. Let them go their way. If it is of their own doing, it will fail. It will cease to exist. It will stop. But if it is of God, if God is involved in it, God is a part of it, there's nothing that anyone can do to stop it. Absolutely nothing. And people need to understand that. Those in the main and alternative news media streams and those in command and control authority in Washington, D.C. need to understand that. They look with contempt, they look down the end of their nose at people like Anonymous, at people in the Occupy Wall Street movement, at people in the Tea Party movement. Now, I want to say this. This is just an aside concerning the Tea Party movement. I personally was instrumental in getting that started. I went to Texas way back when. There was a big organizational meeting in 2000, in the summer of 2000. Believe it or not, people were hot to trot then, politically, socially, and ecumenically. They weren't really satisfied with their pick in George W. Bush. Uh, they didn't really care for all that much in Albert Gore Jr., former Vice President of the United States. So they were looking for alternatives. They were looking then for people and for alternatives. I was too. And a bunch of us went down to Rockwall and Uvalde, Texas, and we met with a lot of great people down there. A whole lot of uh, common, everyday, ordinary, but extremely important people that cared about this country, that loved this country, that were willing to do what was necessary in order to return their country back to the basic Judeo-Christian values and morals and principles on which it was founded. And it was, the Tea Party effort started, it was a simple, basic movement. There was no money involved. There was no politicians involved. There was no outside or undue influence. It was just a group of everyday, ordinary, extraordinary, common Americans. White, yellow, green, black, brown, all of us met in Rockwall and Uvalde, Texas, for several days and several weeks in 2000. And we said to ourselves, this is not what we signed up for. This is not what we agreed to. We began to see then, in the early goings of the Bush administration, what he was doing. The fact that days before September the 11th, 2001, there was nearly $90 billion missing in civil and national defense funds that are still unaccounted for today, conveniently. $90 billion in civil and national defense funds that are still missing. Nobody knows where they are. And then days later, we had 9/11. And in the meantime, the investigations and the look-intos concerning this money ceased because everybody was busy. 9/11. My God, the country has been attacked. What are we going to do? What's going to happen? What's going to take place? And we were concentrated and as fixed on that rather than what we really and truly needed to be concentrated and as fixed on. And as the movement and the effort progressed, the Tea Party movement and the effort progressed, more and more outside and undue influence got involved. Big money donors came in. They said, "Oh, we want to help. We want to help. We want to contribute. We love our country too, you know." I began to look for the exits because that's not what I signed up for. But several people stay. And that's their business, and that's fine. Because in the end, movements like the Tea Party, especially what it is now, will die off. It will cease to exist because it is not of God. It's not. You have the Occupy Wall Street movement. They are literally feeding the sick, clothing the poor, or caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, housing people, providing a means and a method and a way in which to better society as a whole, doing something that government itself seems to have a very severe problem doing, as with evidence with this government shutdown. You have Anonymous, who in their own loving and caring and kind and sweet way present proof every day of what the United States federal government is doing in your and my and everybody else in the free world's good name. Thank God for Occupy Wall Street and Anonymous. Thank God. Okay? Because they have the courage of their convictions and they are doing the Lord's work. More than the Lord's work. These efforts, I believe, will continue to be successful because God is involved. God is a part of that process. Unless and until, as I said in our previous video, in video number 2, and I'll say it again here in video number 1, unless and until 330 million Americans rise up in one accord agreement and say, we need to heal the sick, we need to raise the dead, we need to cast out demons in the name of our God, and we need to care for the least of these, the widows and the orphans. We will continue to be distracted. More things will go on in your and my good name that should not go on. I do not understand for the life of me what the problem is concerning the main and alternative news media streams. I would think that they would welcome the support, would welcome the help, because they're supposed to be the muckrakers anyway, are they not? They're supposed to be the purveyors and the presenters of truth, are they not? But yet, they deplore and disdain and revile and revere Occupy Wall Street and Anonymous. They have a very serious problem with these two groups. They don't like them. They hate them. They hate them. Because they're doing their job. They are presenting truth every day. Even in some cases by accident. They present some form, shape, or fashion of truth in this world. They shine the sunlight of disinfectant on what that is evil and bad and terrible in this world. What's wrong with that? I would think that, wow, gee, thanks guys, you made my job easier. That's something that I don't, that's something that I can scratch off my list, my to-do list, that I don't have to do. Thank you. Thank you. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying thank you? What's wrong with saying, gosh golly gee, you've made my life, my day, my world that much easier? There's a problem there. There's a disconnect. Because what they do is not of God. And their efforts and their cause, forgive me, will fail. And that's all I have to say about it. Thank you.